Since childhood, you've heard about "let there be light." But have you ever wondered what came before that? Before the first spark illuminated the void, before time took its first step, something was already there, and it wasn't just God. Among the most mysterious visions in Scripture, there is an element rarely discussed from pulpits, but which is present in the most enigmatic descriptions of the heavenly throne: the crown. Not just any crown, but a crown of the divine throne. A symbol? Or a conscious being pulsing with the very essence of creation? Not everything in the Bible is taught in churches. There are ancient texts hidden for centuries that describe this crown not just as an ornament, but as a living part of heavenly reality, something that sees, feels, and perhaps even speaks. What you're about to discover may surprise you, and perhaps forever change the way you understand God's presence in the universe. Stay with me until the end, because we're going to traverse territory where traditional theology doesn't venture. We're going to touch on enigmas that mix mysteries of creation, hidden symbolism, and secret biblical narratives. Imagine, in the heart of heaven, before legions of spiritual beings, stands a throne, and above it, not just a golden ornament, but something that, according to some forbidden writings, actively participates in divine decrees. Have you ever experienced this? Reading a verse and feeling that it holds something that isn't written there, but vibrates between the lines? It's this kind of sensation that will guide our investigation. For if the crown is more than a symbol, it may be the key to understanding how divine authority manifests itself, and who, or what, truly guards a heavenly throne. Some ancient texts suggest that the secret names of God are engraved on it, and that each letter shines with a light that sustains entire worlds. Others, more daring, claim that it is a primordial guardian, an echo of the first divine thought before light even existed. But to what extent is this myth? And to what extent is it revelation? Get ready, because we're about to open a door few have dared to cross. And once you do, you may never look at God's throne the same way again. Now, let's get closer to that crown and find out what might actually be hidden within it. And as we delve into this mystery together, I want to extend a sincere invitation. If, in any way, what I've said so far has awakened something within you, a memory, a question, or even that shiver we feel when something resonates deeply, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. It could be an experience, an interpretation, or even a question that's stuck in your mind. It's incredible to see how each perspective enriches this journey, and often, what you share can ignite a new spark of investigation for the next video. If this topic resonates with you, please like the video now. It seems like a simple gesture, but it's precisely this that helps YouTube realize that this content deserves to reach more people who, like us, seek to understand the mysteries of creation and the truths that history has tried to erase. And of course, if you feel like continuing this journey with me, subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is a new piece of the celestial puzzle, and your presence is what keeps this flame burning. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more seekers of this veiled truth. Now, let's dig deeper, because the next revelation about this crown could change everything you've ever believed about the heavenly throne. The crown that sits upon God's throne. Is it merely a symbol of his authority, or a living, conscious being participating in creation? This question isn't just a theological detail. It's like a key that, if turned, can open doors to a completely different understanding of the spiritual universe. The image we learn from an early age is simple: a majestic throne, a sovereign God, and a shining crown representing his eternal reign. But what if this crown weren't just an inert object? What if, somehow, it had a life of its own, being more than an ornament, more than molded celestial gold? Consider this. In human tradition, crowns symbolize authority, victory, and power. They are placed upon kings and emperors as a visible sign that that person rules over others. But on the divine throne, where nothing is merely symbolic and everything has a real purpose, would it be reasonable to imagine that the crown was merely an adornment? Some ancient texts, hidden for centuries, speak of celestial objects that are, at the same time, conscious entities. And the crown appears there not as a static piece, but as an active part of God's own manifestation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because here we enter a territory where the mind needs to open to understand truths that don't fit into traditional religious molds. Imagine that Even before the first star shone, there was a functioning power structure in the sky, a living hierarchy, each element with its specific function. If the crown is alive, it is not just a symbol, it is a participant in creation, carrying within itself memories, energies, and even the primordial language that ordered all things. In certain mystical traditions, it is said that this crown holds the secret names of God, and that each name is like a frequency that sustains an aspect of the universe. This means that the very fabric of reality may be somehow connected to what this crown is or does. What's more, some apocryphal writings describe it as shining not because of reflection of light, but because its essence is light, a living, conscious light, capable of interacting with other celestial entities. This idea challenges a common mindset because it calls into question what we understand as object and being. In the spiritual realm, the line between the two is not so clear. What appears to us as inanimate matter may, in heaven, be endowed with consciousness, will, and even emotion. Imagine a being whose function is to remain above the Creator's head, not as an adornment, but as an extension of his own presence, participating in the decisions that shape destinies. This possibility has a profound impact on how we view creation. We're not just talking about angels, archangels, and cherubim, but components of the throne, each with personality and function, like living cogs in the great divine mechanism. And if the crown truly is conscious, this means it can perceive, react, and even issue orders, perhaps transmitting divine decrees that affect entire dimensions. Some schools of occult theology go even further, claiming that this crown is actually a guardian of the ineffable name. It not only guards, but protects with a force that prevents this name from being misused. And here comes an intriguing revelation. According to certain manuscripts, for the word to be pronounced for the first time, the crown had to grant a kind of permission, as if it were the guardian of the creative act itself. If this is true, we are faced with one of the greatest enigmas in spiritual history. Creation was not a solitary act of God, but a harmonious concert in which even the elements of his heavenly court actively participated. And if so, what else in this court is alive, conscious, and active? This question, which seems so far removed from everyday life, can completely transform the way we interpret biblical passages that previously seemed simple or figurative. The fascinating thing is realizing how these elements, hidden between the lines, can reveal so much about our own journey. Because just as nothing in the sky is by chance, perhaps in our lives there are also symbols that are more than simple representations. Perhaps every detail we consider decorative actually plays an essential role in the story we are living. And understanding this can change the way we make decisions, how we read the signs around us, and even how we seek the hidden truth behind the events that shape us. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. In biblical tradition, the image of the heavenly throne is grand, almost impossible to convey in human words. Isaiah describes the Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, the train of his robe filling the temple. 6-winged cherubim proclaim, "Holy, holy, holy," as divine glory shakes the foundations. It's a scene that inspires awe, but also a strange sense of distance, something so pure and majestic that it seems untouchable. Ezekiel, in turn, takes us to an even more mysterious setting. He sees living creatures with multiple faces, wheels within wheels that move in sync, and above them, a kind of gleaming firmament. There, upon a sapphire-like structure, stands a throne, and upon the throne, the figure of a man resplendent as fire. It is in this context that the idea of a crown begins to take shape, not just as an adornment, but as a mark of authority crowning this entire manifestation of power. In Revelation, John describes not just a throne, but thrones surrounding it, flashes of lightning and voices issuing from the center, and a rainbow resembling an emerald enveloping the vision. The 24 elders, dressed in white, cast their crowns before the throne, as if returning all authority and glory to the one seated upon it. This gesture is not merely symbolic, but charged with spiritual meaning. Everything given is returned. All power comes from him and returns to him. These passages shape our mindset about the divine throne and, consequently, the crown that adorns it. In the most common interpretation, it is a symbol of God's absolute sovereignty, eternal victory, and undisputed kingship. A visible representation of that which is invisible is rule over all things. This interpretation creates a secure foundation, a point of reference for our faith and our imagination. But there's something curious about the way the Bible describes symbols. Often, what is presented as just an object carries layers of meaning that aren't evident on the surface. Think of Moses' staff. It wasn't just a piece of wood, but an instrument that parted the sea and brought plagues upon Egypt. Think of the Ark of the Covenant. Seemingly a golden chest, but it held the presence and voice of God himself. So why would the crown of the throne be any different? Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because when we begin to look at these elements with spiritual eyes, we realize that they aren't just there to compose a pretty scene. They have a function, an impact, and are often part of a living system operating in an invisible world. The throne, for example, is not just a seat. It is a command center of the spiritual universe, where eternal decisions are made, where destinies are established, and where the balance of all creation is maintained. And if the crown is directly connected to this command center, its function may go far beyond representing authority. It may act as a kind of link between the divine mind and the physical manifestations of his power. Perhaps this is why some ancient texts describe it with details that belie an inanimate object. Moving lights, echoing voices, even changing expressions as if reacting to what happens in heaven and on earth. When we understand the biblical tradition in this way, we realize that it does not limit us. On the contrary, it prepares us to expand our vision. It is as if the scriptures were a map with marked paths, but which also leaves blank spaces, inviting the seeker to explore. And this exploration leads us to consider that if human crowns are fragile and temporary, the divine crown is eternal and may well be a living entity with its own consciousness that actively participates in God's rule over all creation. This perspective doesn't nullify traditional faith, but rather deepens its meaning. It opens a way to understand that the heavenly throne is not a stage frozen in time, but dynamic reality, where each element has a role, a voice, and a purpose. It is in this understanding that we begin to see the crown not simply as molded gold, but as a living participant in the cosmic drama, as essential as the angels and the very decrees that sustain the universe. Right there, this makes sense to me. But what few know is that outside the most well-known pages of Scripture, there are records that describe this crown in a completely different way. In apocryphal texts, fragments preserved by small communities, and manuscripts that survive the silence imposed by centuries, the crown does not appear as a passive object. It is portrayed as a living entity, endowed with presence, surrounded by lights that move as if breathing and voices that echo like a distant choir, intoning words that the human mind cannot translate. These descriptions go far beyond metaphor. They suggest that the throne's crown is not merely a symbol of divine sovereignty, but an active participant in the very governance of the heavens. In some of these occult narratives, it is not simply positioned above the Creator's head, but hovers lightly, as if supported by a non-physical force. The lights surrounding it are described as liquid flames, each of which has a specific purpose, linked to different spiritual dimensions. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because when we look at these accounts, we realize that they don't just describe an element of the throne, but reveal a completely different mindset about how the heavenly realm works. In this view, everything before the throne is alive, conscious, and interconnected. And if the crown is part of this, then it is not just a representation, but a manifestation of divine consciousness itself. Some Kabbalistic writings, for example, speak of a keter, a term meaning crown, as the highest of divine emanations, a connecting point between the unknowable and the perceptible. In this concept, the crown is not an artifact, but a state of being, a level of purity and authority so absolute that everything that approaches it is transformed. It is not difficult to imagine how this idea could emerge over the centuries, with the literal image of the crown upon the throne. There are also ancient accounts that claim this crown holds secrets that not even all angels know. It contains, engraved in its essence, codes that sustain the order of the cosmos, as if it were a living archive inscribed with the most ancient and immutable laws of creation. Every voice that echoes around it is said to be a reminder of a divine decree, pronounced even before there was a universe to obey it. The impact of this vision is profound. If the crown is a conscious entity, it could interact, react, and even anticipate events. It could be, in a sense, a silent oracle, reflecting in the brilliance of its lights not only divine glory, but also the history and destiny of creation. Imagine that, Within each change of color or intensity, a message were embedded, not for the ears, but for the spirits of those allowed to understand it. And this brings us to another intriguing revelation. Some mystics argue that the crown is not only the receiver of divine glory, but also its transmitter. It does not keep the light to itself, but sends it out, channeling it to the places and times determined by the Creator. Thus, each ray that emanates from it could signify a new cycle, a decision made behind the scenes in heaven, or even the beginning of a transformation in human history. This interpretation opens a door to a much more dynamic understanding of the throne. It's not just a seated, distant God with a mobile crown on his head. It's a living, pulsating scene where each element actively participates in maintaining universal balance. It's as if we were before a cosmic orchestra, and the crown were both an instrument and a conductor, performing a symphony that sustains existence itself. When we look at this set of revelations, we realize that what we've been told in the official tradition is only part of the story. Not that it's wrong, but perhaps it's incomplete. And this incompleteness isn't a mistake. It's an invitation. An invitation to seek more, to go beyond, to realize that the hidden truth is always present, but it requires courage to question and humility to listen. Comment there, I'm on this journey too. Among the silent pages of forgotten books, the crown of the divine throne takes on contours few dare imagine. In the book of Enoch, for example, there are passages that describe the throne surrounded by a living fire, and above it something that shines brighter than 1,000 suns, not as polished metal, but as a being radiating thought and intention. There, the crown is not merely an ornament. It is called eternal witness and spokesman of the Most High. This suggests that it is not mute. On the contrary, at certain moments, it emits sounds that are not mere words, but spiritual commands understood only by heavenly messengers. 2nd Esdras, a text considered apocryphal, also contains an intriguing description. In one of the visions, the prophet sees upon the head of the great king a diadem that seemed to form and unmake constellations at every moment. This image is powerful because it suggests movement and transformation, as if the crown were a living projection of divine will, adjusting itself in tune with the decisions made in God's heart. It's not difficult to imagine that if the crown can mold itself and even alter its own shape, it can also convey commands, perhaps in a language that is pure energy. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we delve into the oldest rabbinic traditions, we find surprising point of convergence. Some masters speak of a Keter Malchut, the crown of divine royalty, which is not a physical jewel, but an entity of light that interacts with the angels closest to the throne. It would be responsible for authorizing certain missions, releasing or withholding messages that would be sent to the lower worlds. In other words, without the consent of this living crown, not even the angels could act. This mediating function places it in a strategic role within the celestial hierarchy. It is not simply something God uses as a symbol, but an extension of his own presence, with freedom to act according to immutable principles. There are accounts that claim that when the crown speaks, no sound is heard, but an irresistible impulse takes hold of the celestial beings, driving them to carry out the order received without question. It is as if the very structure of the universe recognizes the authority of this silent voice. The impact of this idea is enormous, because it suggests that the crown not only manifests God's glory, but also administers the practical aspects of his government. Imagine that, as the Creator issues a decree, the crown is the first to absorb this decision and translate it into action. It could, in that instant, send light signals to specific angels, activate spiritual forces at different levels of creation, and invisibly influence even the course of events on Earth. Some even more reserved traditions claim that the crown holds within itself a kind of living memory of all the decrees ever pronounced since the beginning. This means that it is not only an agent of the present, but also the guardian of the entire spiritual history of the cosmos. And this memory is not passive. It can be consulted, as if it were a sacred archive accessible only to God himself and, on rare occasions, to specially authorized beings. This conception forces us to rethink our mindset about the heavenly throne. We're not talking about a fixed, immobile throne surrounded by golden ornaments. We're talking about a living system, where each element has a voice, role, and function, and where the crown can be not only an emblem of authority, but the very channel through which that authority flows and manifests itself. By understanding this, we realize that the crown is not there merely to be admired. It is an active part of the divine machinery that maintains a balance of the universe and guides history according to the eternal will. Comment there. That makes sense to me. When we delve into the occult symbolism associated with the crown of the divine throne, we realize that we are faced with an element charged with meanings that go far beyond celestial aesthetics. In many esoteric interpretations, it is understood as a visible manifestation of the seven spirits of God, not seven independent entities, but seven complete expressions of His presence, which together form a perfect circle of power and wisdom. It is as if each stone, each ray of light emanating from it, represents one of these aspects: wisdom, understanding, counsel, strength, knowledge, fear, and the divine presence itself. And when these seven align, we have the fullness of the Spirit operating indivisibly. The idea of the crown as the bearer of the sacred name is also fascinating. In ancient mystical traditions, it is believed that the name of God is not just a sound, but a pattern of energy that sustains all creation. Engraved in the essence of the crown, this name is not spoken. It vibrates. It is perceived as light, as color, as a pulse that spreads to every corner of existence. It is as if the crown were a spiritual anchor, connecting the throne to the very fabric of reality, keeping everything together and in balance. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we speak of this connection with the sacred name, we inevitably enter the realm of the language of creation. The traditional Genesis narrative speaks of "let there be," but in occult interpretations, this "let there be" is not just a word. It is a direct emanation of this primordial language, a language that is not limited to sounds, but capable of giving form to what did not exist. In this context, the crown is not only a witness to this process, but an integral part of it, acting as a channel that translates divine will into concrete reality. Some scholars of ancient texts claim that, in the earliest moment of creation, the crown functioned as a kind of filter, allowing only orders aligned with perfect divine harmony to be pronounced. This means that it was not only a symbol of authority, but also a guardian of creative balance, ensuring that nothing that emanated from the throne could create distortion or chaos in the newly formed universe. This function places it in a decisive role, not only at the beginning, but throughout the entire cosmic journey of creation. And there's a more subtle aspect. In some mystical currents, the crown is seen as a point of convergence between the invisible and the visible, between the pure essence of God and the perceptible world. It would be the first object created, not in the sense of matter, but in the sense of being the first external manifestation of divine consciousness. If this is true, then every detail of the crown carries within itself the spiritual DNA of everything that came after. This reading completely changes the mindset with which we approach the biblical text. Instead of imagining the crown as an immobile adornment, we begin to see it as an active, vibrant instrument, charged with meaning and purpose. It not only represents divine government, it participates in it, amplifies it, and in a sense, ensures its perfect fulfillment. And perhaps that's why, over the centuries, so many traditions have attempted to preserve or decipher this symbolism. The quest to understand the crown is, at its core, the quest to understand the very origin of creative language, and with it, to touch the essence of the hidden truth that underlies all things. It's a journey that spans time, cultures, and beliefs, always pointing to the same point: divine consciousness manifested in form, light, and power. Right there, I'm on this journey too. Some scholars of occult theology argue that understanding the crown of the divine throne is like trying to read a book written simultaneously in every language in the world, including those never spoken on earth. This complexity stems not only from the depth of the symbolism, but from the way it manifests on multiple levels of reality. Researchers of Hebrew mysticism, for example, argue that the crown is not a created object in the same sense as the rest of creation. It is a direct emanation of divine will, something inseparable from God himself, and therefore incompletely describable. Among the most intriguing hypotheses is the idea that the crown is actually an interface between the Creator and the realities he governs. This means that every decree, every decision made on the throne, would somehow pass through this crown, as it were a perfect translator of the divine language into the laws governing the cosmos. It's a vision that resembles concepts found in theoretical physics, where certain structures function as bridges between distinct dimensions. Here, the crown would assume a similar role, but on an absolutely spiritual level. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a line of thought that suggests the crown is not only a receiver and transmitter, but also the guardian of a primordial code, a set of immutable principles that serve as the foundation for all existence. If it were possible to access this code, it would be possible to understand not only how things are, but why they are that way. This possibility, of course, remains shrouded in mystery, as such knowledge would be restricted to the divine sphere and a very few authorized beings. In the view of some Christian mystics, the crown would be the epitome of what they call conscious glory. It is not merely a static light, but a presence that perceives, responds, and even anticipates what is to come. This understanding radically changes the way we view the heavenly throne, not as a fixed and immutable setting, but as a living organism, where each element is in constant interaction, aligned with the supreme will. This image of the throne as something dynamic reinforces the idea that heaven is not just a destination, but a center of decisions that affect all ages and places. There are also interpretations that link the crown to the concept of distributed authority in the spiritual realm. In this model, the crown would not only symbolize God's absolute power, but also strategically share it with certain celestial beings and orders, allowing them to carry out His will in established places and times. This would explain reports of angels acting with total authority on certain missions, as if they temporarily carried a reflection of the crown within themselves. The impact of this perspective is transformative, for it forces us to rethink our mindset about power and hierarchy in the spiritual world. If the crown is not just an insignia, but a living force that participates in divine governance, then the very concept of authority changes. It ceases to be something distant and untouchable and becomes understood as an active energy that flows and interacts with all levels of creation. This shift in perspective also affects how we read certain biblical passages. When we see passages that describe God as surrounded with glory or crowned with honor, we may not be dealing with mere poetic metaphors, but with precise descriptions of a real, active element that directly influences how heaven governs the earth. It's as if, behind every divine decision, there's an invisible process in which the crown plays an essential role, ensuring that each act is in perfect harmony with the eternal purpose. Comment there, that makes sense to me. If we accept the possibility that the crown is more than a symbol, we enter a territory where each element of the throne can play a role that goes far beyond what we imagine. This changes the logic of the scene that has so often been painted as merely a static vision of glory and majesty. If the crown participates in decisions, if it interacts with divine will, if it is capable of issuing orders, then perhaps the throne is not just a seat of authority, but the center of a living organism, pulsating in perfect harmony with the Creator. This idea leads us to question what else in this scenario might have self-awareness. The fiery wheels seen by Ezekiel, for example, have always been described as beings or living structures that move in response to the divine presence. What if these wheels are not just supports, but sentinels? What if every detail that makes up the throne, from the gleaming firmament to the rainbow that surrounds it, is part of a living, intelligent network that responds to God's direct command? Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because thinking this way requires a transformation in our mindset about what life and consciousness are in the spiritual realm. We're accustomed to separating beings from objects, but in the celestial context, this division may not exist. Everything in the Creator's presence can carry within itself the spark of His own life. This means that the boundary between the symbolic and the literal dissolves, and what remains is a system of full interaction, where each part fulfills a vital function. This understanding also forces us to reconsider the impact this reality has on us. If even what we consider inanimate before the throne participates in the execution of divine will, then perhaps all of creation is alive in ways we cannot yet perceive. This opens up room for entirely new interpretations of biblical passages that speak of the heavens declaring the glory of God or the rocks crying out. This may not just be poetic language. It may be literal. And there's an even more provocative question. If the crown is conscious and plays such a decisive role, it also holds its own insights into the unfolding of history. Imagine a being that not only observes but actively participates since the beginning of time, following every decision and revelation. What would it know about the behind-the-scenes of creation? What secrets could it reveal or hide about what's to come? Perhaps this is precisely the most enigmatic point of all, What we see described in Scripture may be just a fraction of a much larger picture, where every element, every light, every sound has its own life and a specific role in the eternal balance. If the crown is conscious, then the inevitable question is, what else on God's throne could be alive? Comment there. I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, it's because this mystery has also touched you. So, here's my invitation. Subscribe to the channel to continue this journey with me, because each new video is another piece of this puzzle we're putting together. And leave a comment with the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," just so I know you were there for this conversation until the very last moment. If this content resonated with you, please leave a like. It's a simple gesture, but it keeps the connection we created here alive and helps this space reach more searchers like us. And, of course, it doesn't stop there. There's a video right here that complements everything we talked about today. Click and stay with me there. The next revelation may be even more surprising.